2021, number 1, published in Statutory Instrument 127A of 2021, provides that every year the Minister responsible for finance must present to the National Assembly a statement of the estimated revenues and expenditures of the government in the next financial year. In compliance with these provisions, Mr. Speaker, I therefore move that leave be granted to present a statement of the estimated revenues and expenditures of the Republic of Zimbabwe for the 2025 financial year and to make provisions for matters ancillary and incidental to this purpose. Mr. Speaker, the year 2024 has been an extraordinary year, presenting both challenges and opportunities. The challenges have impacted on the economy, the people's lives, and progress towards achieving the nation's Vision 2030 of becoming an upper middle income society. The economy has therefore shown remarkable resilience, reflecting government's successful implementation of strategic reforms and policies since 2018 through the Transitional Stabilization Program, TSP, and the National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, which is coming to an end at the end of 2025. However, there is still need to entrench economic resilience, especially against climate change and volatility of commodity prices. Hence the theme of the 2025 national budget of building resilience for sustained economic transformation. Before I go into the details of the budget, let me convey my gratitude to His Excellency, the President, Comrade Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, for his leadership, guidance, and wisdom in the formulation of this budget. I also want to recognize the valuable inputs from the two Vice Presidents, Honorable General Retired Dr. C.G. D.N. Chiwenga and Honorable Colonel Retired K.C.D. Mohadi, as well as colleague ministers who are present in this House. Mr. Speaker, your inputs, together with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Budget, Finance and Investment Promotion and other parliamentary committees, individual parliamentarians, government departments, industry, development partners, academia, civil society, bankers, the youth, women, small-scale entrepreneurs, among others, went a long way in shaping this budget. Please allow me now to turn to the details of the 2025 national budget. Let me begin with economic developments, Mr. Speaker. The subdued global economic performance during 2024 is having a negative impact on the domestic economy through lower international mineral commodity prices, except for gold, but also experiencing high borrowing costs. Let me turn specifically to the global economy. Mr. Speaker, global economic growth is projected to hold steady at 3.2% in 2024 and 2025, respectively, according to the October 2024 IMF World Economic Outlook projections. This is due to the slowdown in economic activity across advanced economies and emerging markets. As I'm presenting, Mr. Speaker, if you could turn to the screens, you'll be able to see some charts or slides that will enhance the presentation. So from that slide, you can see various countries and their growth projections for 2025. Downside risks such as climate change, volatile global financial markets, escalating conflicts, heightened policy uncertainty, and increased protectionist measures have the potential to hold back global growth going forward. Let me turn to sub-Saharan Africa. The sub-Saharan Africa region will grow by 3.6% in 2024 and is projected to grow by 4.2% in 2025, reflecting a bullish outlook for the region. This is largely on account of gradual improvements in supply chains and the recovery from the negative effects of earlier weather shocks. You can see a slide there showing the various sub-Saharan African countries. Mr. Speaker said, real GDP growth in Southern Africa, in the SADC region specifically, is projected at 2.5% and 3.3% in 2024 and 2025 respectively. Let me turn to global commodity prices. Despite an anticipated modest decrease in overall commodity prices in 2024-2025, commodity prices are projected to stay above the pre-pandemic levels, but are experiencing a dip in 2025. This reflects enduring supply constraints and demand patterns that have shifted during the post-pandemic recovery period. I now turn to the domestic economy, looking at growth. Mr. Speaker said, the domestic economy is still projected to record a GDP growth rate of 2% in 2024 on account of the impact of the El Nino-induced drought. However, the agricultural sector, which was initially projected to contract by as much as 21%, is now expected to contract by minus 15% on account of a better than anticipated output on wheat and the dairy sector. On the screen, various sectors of the economy. It's all small letters, but those who have a quick eye will be able to see that most sectors, Mr. Speaker said, in fact, all sectors except agriculture for this year are showing a positive rate of growth. And into 2025, all sectors will record a positive rate of growth. In the outlook, economic growth is now projected at 6% in 2025. The anticipated La Nina weather phenomenon, usually associated with normal to above normal rainfall, is going to be a major driver of growth in agriculture and electricity generation. Mr. Speaker said, the 2025 economic growth projections are underpinned by the following broad assumptions. One, a normal to above normal rainfall, which is expected to result in increased agricultural production. Two, a stable exchange rate and low inflation, providing a stable macroeconomic environment and a conducive environment for doing business. Three, tight fiscal and monetary policies being implemented. The attainment of the projected 6% economic growth in 2025 will result in Zimbabwe being one of the fastest growing economies in the region next year. Mr. Speaker said, we continue to innovate as government in trying to assess the state of the economy. So we've developed a composite indicator of economic activity. So the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion, in collaboration with the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, has developed a composite indicator of economic activity to enhance economic monitoring using high-frequency data. And there's a chart on the screen showing this index, which is in red, and what you have in blue there is the GDP figure. This index of measuring economic activity complements quarterly GDP figures by providing a comprehensive picture of the economy's performance frequently, and this is critical for urgent or urgent and critical policy making and decision making. Let me turn to the foreign currency receipts. The country's external sector position has remained resilient, as reflected by a notable increase in foreign currency receipts, which rose by 17.9% to $10 billion during the first 9 months of 2024, this was from 8.5 billion US dollars that was received during the same period last year in 2023. Let me turn to the balance of payments development and outlook. Mr. Speaker, sir, preliminary estimates indicate that the current account balance recorded a surplus of 227 million US dollars in the first 9 months of 2024, a significant improvement from a surplus of 59.4 million US dollars that was recorded in the same period last year. To year end, the current account position is projected to record a surplus of 150.5 million US dollars and further improving to 277.4 million US dollars in 2025. This is driven mainly by the resilient diaspora remittances and as well as the projected narrowing of the direct trade deficit. Let me turn to the inflation profile, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, prices for goods and services have relatively been stable following the introduction of the Zimbabwe gold currency, the ZiG, on the 5th of April 2024. Month-on-month ZiG inflation declined by minus 2.4% in May 2024 and averaged 0% in the second quarter of the year. We have a chart there showing the inflation profile. However, inflation pressures emerged in August to October in 2024, attributable to a surge in parallel market foreign exchange rate activities, which worsened inflation expectations. Consequently, the Reserve Bank and its Monetary Policy Committee implemented stabilization measures, which included increasing the bank policy rate and standardizing statutory reserve requirements for deposits. The Monetary Policy Committee and the Reserve Bank also allowed greater exchange rate flexibility and reduced the limit on foreign exchange individuals can take out of the country. The local currency also depreciated, while the amount that can be taken out of the country was also reduced. These measures have had a positive impact, as both the official and the parallel exchange rates have stabilized. In 2025, ZiG inflation is expected to remain stable, with an average month-on-month inflation of below 3% on the back of tight fiscal and monetary policies. Let me turn to the public finance developments and outlook to the end of 2024, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the performance during the first 9 months of the year, total revenue collections amounted to 62.4 billion ZiG against expenditures of 66.5 billion ZiG. You can see the slides again on the screen showing those numbers. Consequently, a budget deficit of 4.1 billion ZiG was recorded in the first 9 months of the year. Overall budget utilization by our ministries, departments and agencies, or MDAs for short, stood at 76% as at 30 September 2024. Taking into account recent developments in the foreign exchange market and civil servant salary reviews, total revenue collections to year end are projected at 110.7 billion ZiG, or 17% of GDP, while expenditures are expected to be 119.97 billion ZiG, which is 18.4% of GDP, resulting in a projected deficit of 9.3 billion ZiG, which is equivalent of minus 1.4% of GDP. Let me turn to the public debt situation. Mr. Speaker, the nominal stock of total public and publicly guaranteed debt as of the end of September 2024 amounted to 524 billion ZiG, broken down as follows: external debt at 307 billion ZiG and domestic debt at 218 billion ZiG. In real terms, the total debt stood at $21.1 billion US dollars as at end of 2024, of which external debt amounted to $12.3 billion US dollars and domestic debt amounted to $8.7 billion US dollars. I now turn to the 2025 macroeconomic fiscal framework. Mr. Speaker, in line with the projected GDP growth of 6% during 2025, revenue collections are estimated at 270.3 billion ZiG, which is 19.6% of GDP, comprising 218.2 billion tax revenues and 52.1 billion non-tax revenues. For what is worth, Mr. Speaker, these figures are a major adjustment from what we saw when we had the retreat with the parliamentarians in Bulawayo. The 2025 fiscal framework therefore provides for overall expenditures of 276.4 billion ZiG, or 20.1% of GDP, with recurrent expenditures of 236.8 billion, or 17.2% of GDP, and acquisition of financial and non-financial assets, which really means capital expenditure, is set at 39.6 billion ZiG, which is about 2.9% of GDP. In US dollar terms, the fiscal framework translates to revenues of 7.5 billion US dollars and expenditures of 7.7 billion US dollars. Let me turn to the vote allocations, Mr. Speaker. During the 2025 national budget formulation stage, ministries, departments, and agencies, MDAs, submitted total bids of over 700 billion ZiG against an available budget envelope of 276.4 billion ZiG. This is more than double the ceiling of revenue collection capacity of 19.6% of GDP. The available resource envelope was allocated among the ministries, departments, and agencies as follows, and you see the slide on the screen, but I'll go through these one by one if they're too small to see. Let me turn to the issue of budget financing. Mr. Speaker, the budget deficit of 6.1 billion, or 0.4% of GDP for 2025, reflects the need for fiscal consolidation and discipline against a background of high debt servicing obligations amounting to 19.2 billion ZiG, which now accounts for 7% of overall government expenditure outlays. Mr. Speaker, there are risks to the budget projections. Mr. Speaker, the macro fiscal framework, which is guiding the budget, faces risks, which, if not mitigated, will put pressure on public finances, posing serious ramifications on overall macroeconomic stability. Such risks relate to macroeconomic shocks, natural disasters, contingent liabilities, geopolitical tensions, declining commodity prices, expenditure outlays outside the approved budgetary provisions, among others. Let me go deeper, Mr. Speaker, into the 2025 national budget strategic priority areas. The 2025 national budget focuses on enhancing macroeconomic stability and significantly improving the environment for doing business, as well as delivery of social services to enhance the human capital base of the country. On economic growth and macro stability, Mr. Speaker, under this pillar, the thrust of the budget is to entrench price and exchange rate stability, as well as to enhance acceptance of the local currency, the ZiG, through the deployment of appropriate and complementary fiscal and monetary policy tools. On the fiscal front, the government will ensure the alignment of expenditure outlays to available resources while prioritizing development and social expenditures. To complement these fiscal efforts, the monetary authorities will continue to refine and entrench the foreign exchange market system and use monetary policy tools to anchor price stability. Let me turn to the support for productive value chains, beginning with agriculture. The agricultural sector is projected to recover from 15% contraction in 2024 and to grow by 12.8% in 2025. Interventions in the agricultural sector will be guided by the Agriculture Food Systems and Rural Transformation Strategy and the Agriculture Recovery Plan. To support these interventions, 22.9 billion ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development during the 2025 to cater for the following areas, among others: dam construction, irrigation development, rural development 8.0 support, contracting and procurement of grain for our strategic grain reserve, National Enhanced Agriculture Productivity Scheme, and the Agriculture Productive Social Protection Scheme, or Fumvudza Intwasa for short, among others. Turning to the mining sector is projected to grow by 2.3% in 2024, which is lower than the initial projection on account of subdued performance of the PGM's group of minerals attributable to low commodity prices or lower commodity prices in general. In 2025, the sector is projected to grow at 5.6%, primarily driven by anticipated growth in PGM's gold, chrome, and diamond outputs. An amount of 664 million ZiG has been allocated to the Ministry of Mines and Mining Development in order for them to manage this sector and provide a conducive mining environment for mineral exploration and mineral beneficiation. Let me turn to the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector is now projected to grow by 2% in 2024 and is expected to pick up growth in 2025 and grow by 3.1%. This is driven by increased agricultural output, which will stimulate agro-processing industries, particularly in the drinks and beverages subsectors. To support the implementation of the Zimbabwe Industrial Reconstruction and Growth Plan of 2024 and 2025, 550.9 million ZiG is being allocated to the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. This also includes support for a development finance fund for funding new industries in line with the plan. I now turn to tourism, Mr. Speaker. The tourism industry is projected to grow by 4.3% in 2025, benefiting from enhanced visa facilitation, investments in tourism infrastructure, the housing of both domestic and the hosting of both domestic and international events, as well as tourism product diversification. To support the operations of the Ministry of Tourism and Hospitality Industry, an amount of 294.6 million ZiG has been set aside to enable them to advance the growth of the sector, as well as to establish the country as a tourist destination of choice. On the screen, Mr. Speaker, you will see the recovery in international tourism, which is a consistent picture right across the world since COVID. Let me turn to climate. The Zimbabwe National Climate Change Adaptation Plan, NAP of 2024 to 2030, paves the way for the implementation of suitable adaptation measures to reduce the country's vulnerability to climate change in line with the National Development Contributions, NDCs. Therefore, the 2025 national budget has set aside 516.8 million ZiG for the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife to implement the following: the hosting of COP 2015, COP 2015 of the Ramsar Convention, and the SADC Transfrontier Conservation Summit, the Presidential Legacy Forest Project, the restoration of wetlands, also to facilitate the rehabilitation of degraded land in mining areas. And finally, resources are being set aside for upgrading of Zimpac's infrastructure. Let me turn to infrastructure, ICT, and the whole digital economy agenda. Mr. Speaker said, during 2025, outlays under the Public Sector Infrastructure Investment Program seeks to address infrastructure gaps in support of sustainable economic growth without putting pressure on stability of the domestic currency. The targeted projects will maximize synergies between sectors, positively impact on productivity, building resilience, allowing the country to seize opportunities and innovate in a rapidly evolving global landscape. Therefore, resources amounting to 58.6 billion ZiG will be availed towards infrastructure investment, inclusive of intergovernmental fiscal transfers, or devolution funds for short, which will be broken down as follows. So budget revenues of 28.4 billion, and then development partner support of $31.9 million US dollars, equivalent to 1.2 billion ZiG. There will be some loan financing as well of 1.8 billion ZiG, and there will be statutory and other funding to the tune of 27.2 billion ZiG. All this is going towards the infrastructure, broad infrastructure pillar. Let me turn specifically to transport. Logistical services, including a modern railway system, are critical in enhancing domestic, regional, and international trade. In this regard, 5.4 billion ZiG has been allocated to the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure Development to support the targeted infrastructure projects. A few words about water and sanitation, Mr. Speaker. Regarding water provision, interventions are guided by the integrated approach to water development and the infrastructure development model, which seeks to upgrade water harvesting programs and ensuring that citizens derive immediate benefits through the productive use of such investments, through the investment in irrigation for short. Overall, support towards dam construction projects amounts to 2 billion ZiG. A few points about the energy sector. In the 2025 national budget has allocated 259.8 million ZiG to the Ministry of Energy and Power Development to facilitate investment in power generation, in transmission, in the distribution network, as well as in rural electrification. Turning to housing, Mr. Speaker said, a government's thrust on housing under the National Development Strategy 1 is to ensure citizens access to affordable and quality housing, both in urban and rural areas, given that shelter is a basic human right. To support housing development, rehabilitation and maintenance of existing public facilities, as well as construction of composite buildings and other public offices, the budget has allocated 696.2 million ZiG to the Ministry of National Housing and Social Amenities. Let me turn to the area of information, communication and technology, ICT. The country has made good progress over the last 3 years in the deployment of ICT systems, such as the integrated electronic case management system across several key judicial bodies. To sustain these achievements, government has set aside 641.4 million ZiG for the Ministry of Information, Communication Technology, postal and courier services. Let me turn to devolution and decentralization. Through the 2025 national budget, resources amounting to 13.6 billion ZiG have been set aside in fulfillment of Section 301, subsection 3 of the Constitution, which stipulates that no less than 5% of the national revenues raised in any financial year must be allocated to the provinces and local authorities in a particular financial year. In a particular financial year. In the 2025 national budget, we've set aside 4.9 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Local Government and Public Works. This allocation includes resources for the refurbishment and construction of government buildings and urban renewal, capacitation of local authorities to enhance risk and disaster preparedness, as well as alignment of local government legislation. Let me turn to the area of youths, sports, arts, and culture. Mr. Speaker said, the 2025 national budget will prioritize the development of youth and empowerment programs by allocating 1.02 billion ZiG to the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Development, and Vocational Training through the capitalization of empowerment institutions as follows. The Youth Empowerment Bank with 77.4 million ZiG, the National Venture Capital Company of Zimbabwe, 108 million ZiG, the Small to Medium Enterprise Development Corporation with 130 million ZiG. In addition, 888.4 million ZiG has been allocated to the Ministry of Sports, Recreation, Arts, and Culture to support sports, arts, and culture sectors. This includes a provision of $1 million for preparations and participation of the Zimbabwe national football team, otherwise known as the Warriors, for the 2025 African Cup of Nations, AFCON, which is set for December 2025 in Morocco. This also includes resources for establishing and equipping of 2 public film studios in Harare and Bulawayo. Let me turn to the issue of gender equity, SMEs, and also veterans of the liberation struggle. To facilitate the empowerment programs and projects of the marginalized sections of the community, including women and the SMEs, the budget has made a provision of 1.02 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Women's Affairs, Community and Small and Medium Enterprises. These supports include capitalization of the following empowerment institutions. The Zimbabwe Women's Microfinance Bank, 130 million ZiG. The small SMEDCO, I've already mentioned that one, and the National Venture Fund has also been mentioned. And these also do a lot in support of our female entrepreneurs. An amount of 807 million ZiG has been allocated to the Ministry of Veterans of the Liberation Struggle affairs to support both monetary and non-monetary initiatives designed to provide for their welfare and to promote self-sufficiency and economic independence among veterans and their families. Let me turn to the issue of human capital development, well-being, and touch on innovation as well. Priority under the health sector, if I'm going to start with health, Mr. Speaker said, priority under the health sector is centered on universal access to health services through the provision of quality health services inclusive of medicines, manpower, and a conducive working environment. In this regard, 28.3 billion ZiG has been allocated to the Ministry of Health and Childcare during the 2025 budget, targeting the following key interventions. Operational support towards central, provincial, and district hospitals, as well as rural clinics. The renovation and construction of medical facilities targeting areas with limited access, particularly rural areas. The procurement of modern equipment, and enhancement of assisted medical treatment orders, AMTOs, and the procurement of medicines and medical supplies. Turning to the education area, the 2025 national budget has allocated 46.6 billion ZiG and 10.3 billion ZiG to the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education and the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, respectively, which will cover the following areas: teaching and learning materials, we have 352.9 million ZiG allocated towards that. The construction, rehabilitation, and upgrading of infrastructure, we've allocated 908 million ZiG. Procurement of equipment and tools of trade, we've allocated 217.5 million ZiG. Towards sanitary wear for girls, we've allocated 85 million ZiG. For the capacitation of laboratories, we've allocated 200 million ZiG. And finally, for the supervision and acquisition of utility vehicles, we've allocated 184.5 million ZiG. Turning to skills audit and development, the Ministry of Skills Audit and Development has been allocated 153.5 million ZiG to identify national skills gaps and to formulate the appropriate skills policy and strategy. Let me turn to social protection, Mr. Speaker. A total of 10.7 billion ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare to increase coverage, harmonize, integrate and strengthen social assistance programs to protect and cushion the vulnerable groups and households. Let me turn to the area of effective institution building and governance. Let me start with the ease of doing business reforms. The multiplicity of registration processes, fees, charges by various ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as the number of government agencies at the country's border posts, are compromising investment facilitation and the investment environment. Going forward, the Office of the President Cabinet will spearhead the coordination of all relevant ministry, department, and agencies with a view of streamlining these processes and to avoid duplications. Turning to justice delivery, to sustain improvements in access to justice for all citizens, ensuring equality before the law and promoting a fair and just society, an allocation of 5.6 billion ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs in order to strengthen the judicial system. Let me turn to the general area of peace and security. Peace and security are fundamental prerequisites for economic transformation of any country. The absence of peace and security dampens the general citizen's ability to engage in productive economic activities and the overall well-being of the populace. The prevailing geopolitical tensions and dynamics necessitate that government allocates adequate resources to our security services to effectively safeguard the nation's territorial integrity, to protect national interests, as well as upholding sovereignty. In this regard, the 2025 national budget will set aside 38.6 billion ZiG to capacitate the country's security institutions. I now turn to the area of image building, engagement and re-engagement. Government is forging ahead with the engagement and re-engagement process to foster meaningful relationships with the global community, to promote and facilitate trade, foreign direct investments, diaspora remittances, and to enhance the nation's international and national image. In addition, government is strengthening communication and advocacy on the domestic and international fronts in an effort to present accurate and timely information on the country. The 2025 national budget has set aside 4 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade to spearhead the image building engagement and re-engagement agenda. In addition, 433.1 million is being allocated to the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services for the dissemination of information locally and globally to uphold and to promote the country's founding values, identity, and interests worldwide. Let me turn to the oversight institutions, Mr. Speaker. Government recognizes the complementary role played by oversight institutions on the executive. Therefore, the budget has made provision for their operations, employment costs, and capital projects. Let me turn to the Parliament of Zimbabwe. The Parliament of Zimbabwe has been allocated 1.8 billion ZiG to cater for the day-to-day operations, Constitutional Development Fund, servicing of vehicle loans for members of Parliament, allowances for members of Parliament, and constituency visits. Turning to the Auditor General, the 2025 national budget has set aside 589.2 million ZiG for the Auditor General's office. This will go towards employment costs, tools of trade, rehabilitation, upgrading of their workspace, as well as training and development. Turning to other institutions, Mr. Speaker, the rest of other independent institutions have been allocated resources as follows. The Public Service Commission, 10.7 billion ZiG. Judicial Services Commission, 1.3 billion ZiG. The Health Service Commission has been allocated 164.8 million ZiG. Office of the Attorney General allocated 218.7 million ZiG. The Council of Chiefs, 196.4 million ZiG. The Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, 176.3 million ZiG. The National Prosecuting Authority allocated 460.5 million ZiG. The Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission allocated 236.2 million ZiG. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, 467.4 million ZiG. The Zimbabwe Gender Commission allocated 177.3 million ZiG. The Zimbabwe Land Commission has been allocated 194.2 million ZiG. And finally, the Zimbabwe Media Commission has been allocated 144.2 million ZiG. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to some revenue measures. And these are highlights. There's more in the longer official statement. Mr. Speaker, sir, the revenue measures that I'm proposing seek to provide support to the productive sectors. They also want to provide incentives, adoption of an environment that is technology friendly, extend relief to taxpayers, incorporate micro and small enterprises into the tax base, as well as in enhancing efficiency in tax administration, thereby promoting taxpayer compliance. Let me begin with the support to industry. The motor vehicle assembly subsector has been identified as a quick win value addition chain, mindful of the potential to transform completely knocked down and semi-knocked down kits to completely build units on the local market. In order to support the local assembly of motor vehicles, I propose to wholly suspend customs duty on semi-knocked down kits for a period of 2 years, beginning 1 January 2025. Let me turn to film, television, and content creators. Mr. Speaker, sir, Zimbabwe has the potential to become a global hub for shooting films and generating local content, thereby competing with other leading countries. I therefore propose to incentivize film production locally through a number of tax incentives in consultation with the relevant stakeholders. Let me turn to some revenue-enhancing measures. Mr. Speaker, You'll be aware that the betting industry is quite popular and is growing, as indicated by the proliferation of sports betting houses countrywide. The sports betting punters, however, receive income from winnings, which is currently non-taxable under personal income tax. In order to include punters in the tax base, I propose to introduce a 10% withholding tax on gross winnings of sports betting punters with the effect from 1 January 2025. Let me turn to some tax relief measures, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let's take a look at the personal income tax thresholds. Mr. Speaker, sir, current legislation exempts the first $100 income earned by employees. Hence, any subsequent income is taxed at rates ranging from 20% up to a marginal income tax of 40% for incomes above $3,000 equivalent per month. On the screen, I see the various tax rates are shown for each income band. The equivalent exempt portion in local currency and the tax bands thereof have, however, been affected by the recent macroeconomic developments, hence the need to provide relief to taxpayers. In view of the above, I propose to adjust the local currency tax-free thresholds to 2,800 ZiG per month, and accordingly adjust the tax bands as follows, with effect from 1 January 2025. And this is shown on the table on the screen. So for incomes of 0 to 2,800, the tax rate is 0%. 2,801 to 8,400 is 20%. 8,401 to 28,000 is 25%. From 28,001 to 56,000 is 30%. And from 50,001 to 84,000 is 35%. And finally, any income above 84,000 is taxed at a flat rate of 40%, as the table shows. I now turn to the beverage sugar content tax, Mr. Speaker. Government in February 2024 introduced a special surtax of $0.001 per gram on added sugar contained in specified beverages. The tax is applied uniformly on both ready-to-drink and cordials or concentrated beverages. Representations from cordial manufacturers indicate that cordials, due to their concentrated nature, have a higher sugar content, hence attract higher effective tax as compared to ready-to-drink beverages. Common practice, however, requires that the tax be based on sugar content of the diluted product. In order to create a level playing field between ready-to-drink and cordials, I propose to review the special surtax on beverages sugar content on cordials from $0.001 per gram to $0.0005 per gram, with effect from 1 January 2025. In other words, I'm proposing that we have the tax on concentrated drinks or cordials, as they are otherwise known. Let me turn to the VAT deferment for the energy sector. Current legislation provides for VAT deferment on capital equipment imported by operators in agriculture, aviation, health, manufacturing, and mining sectors, which has assisted operators to manage cash flows after huge capital outlays. I therefore propose to extend the facility to the energy sector with effect from 1 January 2025. Let me turn to the support for climate-friendly innovations, starting with electric motor vehicles, EV cars. Mr. Speaker, electric motor vehicles attract customs duty of 40%, whilst electric tractors attract a duty of 0%. Cognizance of the need to promote use of eco-friendly vehicles, which will result in reduced carbon emissions, I propose to reduce customs duty on electric motor vehicles from 40% to 25%, with effect from 1 January 2025. In order to incentivize the use of electric vehicles, I propose to extend a rebate of duty on equipment used for setting up electric vehicle solar-powered charging stations imported by approved operators with effect from 1 January 2025. Let me turn to VAT on liquefied petroleum gas. In addition, I propose to exempt liquefied petroleum gas from value-added tax with effect from 1 January 2025 in order to reduce the cost of the product. Let me turn to the plastic carrier bag tax. In order to promote the use of biodegradable packaging, I propose to introduce a 20% plastic carrier bag tax on the sale value with effect from 1 January 2025. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, sir, the 2025 national budget seeks to entrench resilience to shocks, improve macroeconomic environment for the private sector to thrive, to support the job creation, and to improve the revenue base for the economy. Critical is creating a conducive environment characterized by price and exchange rate stability and a conducive ease of doing business environment. As we strive to engender economic resilience, the objective is to promote homegrown solutions through supporting research and development to anchor innovation in order to drive economic transformation towards the attainment of an upper middle income society by year 2030. Mr. Speaker, I finally commend the 2025 national budget to this august House in compliance with the law, and it is accompanied by the following document. Maybe that was a sign, Mr. Speaker. The 2025 national budget statement, the estimates of expenditure, which is the blue book, the finance bill, the appropriation bill, the report to Parliament on public debt, the 2025 Zimbabwe Infrastructure Investment Program, the 2025 Citizens Budget, and the 2025 National Gender Budget. I thank you, Tinotenda, Siabonga, Twalumba, Asante Sana.